So as a pastor in the United Kingdom, I want to address the issue of the attitude that I find amongst British Christians towards Israel. And this is a really important topic, and there are many different factors that influence someone's views on Israel. As we've said, some of this is politics, some of this is theology. A lot of it maybe is ignorance or a lack of understanding of history. There's just a multitude of reasons. But just broadly, speaking for the United Kingdom here, we live in an interesting era of history. On the one hand, many people are troubled with events they see going on in the world. Many people have seen what's happening, yes, in Israel and the wars with Iran and everything that's followed from that, and they're unsettled, they're uncertain. Many people don't have that hope of Jesus Christ, that solid rock to stand on. One of the things that we're seeing is that this is, in fact, creating a spiritual hunger in people too. And this is a good thing. We must use the time wisely to take any opportunity we can to bring people back to Jesus Christ. There was a report done by the Bible Society, the organization that operates globally, but in the UK, they released a report called The Quiet Revival. And one of the things that this report detailed was a surprising result about the rise in church attendance in England. Too often we've heard about the decline of church attendance in many areas, and whilst that was true, within the last 3 years, that trend seems to be going in the opposite direction. And fascinatingly, the reason for the rise in church attendance was because of Generation Z, because of Gen Z. It's young people who are coming back to church. And particularly, actually, it was young men who were coming back to church in their droves. 16% increase in the last 4 years. I mean, this is a fascinating statistic. Now, it's not much in England, obviously. It's still a low-end statistic, but it does show that things are changing. But it's interesting as you actually examine why this is. It's the unsettling world that we live in. It's the culture, people seeking truth, seeking answers. However, I want to just put a word of caution, because much has been said saying that this is a wonderful thing. Absolutely, it's a wonderful thing. But we were also involved in another survey, which is Chosen People Ministries did, that was surveying the attitudes of these young British Christians and what their views were towards Israel and Palestine. And this shows us, let's call it a paradox, that is beginning to develop in the United Kingdom. And I'm sure it's actually probably replicated in the evangelical world outside of the United Kingdom too. And this survey showed us that although British Christians are coming back to faith, at the same time, they are more inclined to hold traditional, stereotypical anti-Semitic views towards Jews and on Israel. Over 40% think that Jewish people still talk too much about the Holocaust. Over 30% believe they have too much power in world affairs. 40% think people hate the Jews because of the way they behave. Over 50%, and this is of Christians, of young Christians, believe that Israel has committed genocide, and that they have purposely targeted innocent civilians. And just over 40% think that Israel is responsible for all Middle East violence. Now, these are shocking claims and statistics that we actually have to take really seriously. This is a massive problem for the church, particularly in the United Kingdom, as the survey data shows, but I believe this would also be comparable to things going on across the world. We have a problem. Young people are coming back to faith, but at the same time, they seem to be becoming more anti-Semitic. And it seems like those two things shouldn't be true. As you come back to faith, you come to faith in Jesus, the Jewish Messiah. You start reading the Bible, a Jewish book, and you understand the history of salvation is from the Jews, and you start looking at it. It seems like it should go in the other direction. So we have to try and think carefully and critically out what is going on here. Let's dig into this a little bit. Firstly, there are two things happening, and this is the survey data revealed this, but I've also experienced this just from speaking with believers across the country. One of the reasons why they're not equipped to answer the anti-Israel charge, the things that they're getting from the culture, is because they are not hearing solid biblical teaching on Israel in their churches. That is always one of the main ways. They're not being taught the whole counsel of God. It's a wonderful thing that they're seeking answers and they're coming back to the church and they're coming to faith, and that's nothing negative to say about that at all. However, it seems to be that then within the church system, they're just not hearing truth about Israel. And this is leading them then, if they're not hearing it from the church, you know that the enemy is going to want to put some other voices into their head. Where are they hearing their information about Israel that's causing all of these anti-Semitic views? And this is the other part we have to understand. They are then going on to social media and the news media, and this is where they're absorbing their information. And as we've already discussed, much of what they're receiving is biased, it's misinformation, it's wrong. And I believe there's a spiritual background going on behind all of this stuff. Like we've said, we know that the enemy wants to destroy anything that is connected to God's word or God's covenant and prove it false. But it plays out in the real world with misinformation and lies. And unfortunately, it seems here that young people in the United Kingdom, although coming back to faith, they're absorbing these views. So what do we do to respond to this as the church? And this is really the whole point of what I do with the Ezra Foundation is to try and produce biblical materials to educate young people, to provide them that biblical theology so that they actually have a grounding and a framework through which they can then interpret what they hear in the world. Because at the moment, it's the other way. They're hearing what they hear in the world, and they're then using that to interpret the scriptures. And of course, when they have all these negative connotations surrounding Israel that they've heard from the media, if they're morally conscious, they think, oh, well, there's obviously no way I can support a nation that does that. Therefore, it seems like the best theology would be that we have to say, yeah, Israel's done away with, it's old, we shouldn't be focusing with it. So you can see logically their mindset, but again, it's based on misinformation. So the challenge to the church now is to counteract that process, first reach them and provide a biblical framework using that threefold stool that I've explained, the covenants, the prophets, and the New Testament, to show them that the promises of God, the purposes of God for Israel remain. And then when they encounter all these other things, at least they've got a grid to filter it and to build upon their understanding.